Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the second book of Kings, that is Malachim Beis, Perek Ches, which is chapter 8. And we just left off the end of the last chapter with the tremendous salvation that the city of Samaria had against the Aramean enemy. How the Aramean army ran off because of hearing loud noises, and they thought they were being chased by allied armies of Israel that didn't exist, and they left their camp with all of its supplies, which ended the siege of the city of Shomron, the city of Samaria. And that was the miracle that Elisha had predicted. Now we focus on a much, if you remember, as we were going through the career of Elisha, we noted numerous times how very often his his interactions, his miracles with the small circle that he was with, whether that was his own fault, if you look at it as a fault, or maybe it was just that the people didn't really listen to him. He only had influence generally within his small circle. It's hard to know. But we know that Elisha at times was able to somewhat widen his influence. But again, the story which we're about to read it raises some questions for which I don't really have, and the verses don't give us really good answers. But here, Elisha diber hel ha'isha asher hechiyat b'na leimar. Elisha spoke with the woman whom he resuscitated, her son. If you recall back a couple chapters ago, this woman had given Elisha a place to stay, and he blessed her with a son. She had a son, and the son died, and Elisha brought him back to life. That was the whole story. But that same woman, who clearly remained within the circle of Elisha, this is sometime later after that event, and he told her as follows: Kumi ulechi at ubeitech v'guri ba'asher teguri. Get up, you and your entire family, and go live wherever you can live. In other words, you just got to get out of this area. Kikara Adonai larav, because God has declared, has called out that there's going to be a famine. V'gam ba el haaretz sheva shanim, and not just a famine, but one that's going to last for 7 years. Now, we've had famine before here. We had the famine in which the people, Elisha's Bnei Nevi'im. We had the story of the pot of stew. We had numerous stories of famines, and exactly there's no real chronology listed here. But we just came off of the famine that was a result of the siege. But this is another famine that seems to be happening after that. Regardless, the obvious question is, if Elisha knows of a famine, why is he only talking to this woman? Why isn't he telling everyone to leave? Or maybe he did tell everyone, it's just no one else listened. Or maybe it's only mentioning his conversation with the woman because of the story we're about to hear, but maybe he told others. Various ways to approach this. But either way, regardless, Vatokum ha'isha, the woman gets up, Vatas kidvar ish Elohim, and she did exactly as the prophet of God had told her. The way it says Kidvar Ish Ha-Elohim here rather than Kidvar Elisha, it gives you the impression that she listened because he was a prophet. Otherwise, she didn't really want to go, but which would be the proper thing to do. And she and her family went. And where did she go? She went to the land of the Philistines to live for 7 years, and that was that. When the 7 years was up, I guess. Now she heard that the famine is over, so she came back from the land of the Philistines. And she went to complain, to issue a complaint in front of the king regarding her home and her field. Because apparently some people had squatters had taken over her field in her absence of 7 years, and they didn't want to leave, and she wants to get her field back, so she's bringing them to court in front of the king. Interestingly, in the next verse we read the following: V'hamelech medaber el Gechazi. And what was the king doing when the woman walked into the court? Remember, this woman back then did have a husband. Why it is that she was the one that talked to Elisha, she was the one who decided to move, and she's the one bringing the court case. It seems that she's a particularly wealthy woman. It's unusual for those times that she would be the one in charge. Maybe the husband isn't around at this time anymore. There's also, again, speculation. Meanwhile, what's the king doing? Medaber el Gechazi. He is talking to Gechazi. Now, we remember Gechazi. He's no longer in the court. He's no longer the servant of Elisha. He was thrown out after he had acted selfishly and taken money from Naaman. But apparently, and one gets the impression that Gechazi is walking around telling everybody, about all of his exploits that he had together with Elisha. He's still trying to milk it for what it's worth, so to speak. He's trying to, gain popularity and gain power and honor because of his association with Elisha. And now he's telling the king all these stories. Gechazi, who had been Nar Isha Elohim, who had been the servant of the man of God, Elisha, and the king was talking to him, saying as follows. In other words, he was asking Gechazi, Sapron Ali eitz kol hagdolos asher asa Elisha. Tell me all about the great stories that Elisha had done. Now, if you recall, in the last chapter, we focused on the fact that the king, to the extent that he listened to Elisha at all, it was on an extremely primitive way. In other words, he thought of Elisha as a guy who can perform tricks. His access to God is in the sense that, he could save us, he can make sure we have food and so on, he can save us from a siege, which is why the king became so angry with Elisha when the siege had gone on for so long that the people were starving so bad that the women were eating their children, and it was just how awful it had gotten. So the king went and got angry at Elisha, right? So the king here has not ever internalized the message that it's not about magic tricks. It's not about beseeching God to do favors. It's about your own actions. It's about your faithfulness to God. It's not about asking and praying for tricks, right? Or going to the prophet and hoping he makes some kind of miracle for you. But the king still doesn't get it. Here we're at a time, this famine is over. The king is sitting around. He wants to hear all of the great magic tricks that Elisha had done. So the king never had gotten past that. He never understood what Elisha was really trying to teach him. So now, and Gechazi is taking advantage of that by he's now the source of all the stories. The other thing we get from here is that one might think that the stories were unknown, right? Remember, a lot of these stories happened in private. They were not done in a public spectacle. That's one thing unique and special about Elisha, right? So it's possible the king just simply did not know about these stories. Or one can also get the impression that, it's kind of like the king was getting entertained, and he can watch one play lots of times. If Gechazi tells the story again, you could be asking Gechazi to tell him, let me hear the inside story. Everyone's talking about it. Let me hear it from you. And then Gechazi might have said it in some kind of entertaining way. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the king wasn't aware of it before. Or it could mean that maybe he wasn't, and now he's asking Gechazi. So, he was telling the king, one of the greatest stories, the greatest hits of Elisha, the prophet, was when he revived the dead boy. At that moment, while he's telling the story, the woman whose son was resuscitated by Elisha comes in to file a complaint with the king, regarding her house and her field. Vayomer Gechazi Adoni HaMelech. So Gechazi says, my master the king, Zoso Isha, this is the woman, V'zeh and this is her son. Apparently her son accompanied her to the king. And one gets even further the impression that maybe the husband wasn't here anymore. Maybe he had passed on, who knows? Because the woman is going with her son as the escort, and now at 7 years, the son is probably, a teenager or something at this point. Asher Hachiat Elisha, the son who had been revived by Elisha. And the king went and asked the woman, regarding her complaint, what the details were. Vayitein la hamelach saris echad leimar, and the king gave her a saris, which is literally a saris means a eunuch. A eunuch generally is the assistants of the king, usually associated with guarding the harem. But he had but sometimes a saris might mean just a king's assistant. So some commentaries, like the Radak, assume that this is a real saris, that is a eunuch. Whether the significance of that here, we can discuss that. But the bottom line is that he gave her an assistant, saying, "Hashevet kol hashelah, make sure they give back everything that's hers. Ve'id kol to us hasada, and even all of the produce from the field. Miyom azva et haaretz ve'harata, from the day that she left the land until now." So that's the story. The woman gets her field back. It's hard to know exactly what's the point of this story, but I try to portray what I believe is really the primary lesson, and that is that the king here still doesn't get the message. Gechazi is still trying to milk his association with Elisha to get whatever he can from it. He's still selfish. He's still walking around pretending, that he's a great guy because of his experience with Elisha. So this is the little episode with which our chapter starts. This will conclude 8a. I'm going to continue with the next story in the next podcast. And it's a little shorter than usual, but if I add the next story, then it'll be a lot longer than usual, and I'd rather not go too long with each podcast. So thank you so much for studying this portion of chapter 8 with me. I look forward to studying the rest of this chapter and the rest of this book together with all of you. And I wish everyone a wonderful day.